Welcome to Cinematire. Today we're going to discuss the rest of Lovecraft. Did you hear that? Oh. Okay, this is fine. I'll just go with it. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the other main characters. We're going to start with Dee. Her real name is Diana, and I feel like that was a very pointed choice. She is George and Hippolyta's daughter. She has a very interesting solo hero's journey that you don't really see with a lot of girls, and also very specifically Black girls. Dee represents the journey of the Black girl in America. She is innocent, she's sweet, she's playful. A lot of her clothing is kind of tomboyish. She's not quite rough and tumble, but you can tell that she's got a very playful spirit. And I kind of have her a little bit close to my heart because she's also a girl who creates comic books for her parents, and that's a thing that I used to do growing up too. Before I became a fashion designer, I wanted to be a comic illustrator. And so when she makes her road comics for her parents, it just, I just loved her. She's just so sweet. But also, it's not this thing that's kind of normal for little Black girls to be into comic books. That's a thing for boys. And especially in the 50s, you wouldn't expect her to be into like superhero stuff. It'd be more like a wholesome girl doing girl stuff if she's reading a comic. But she's dreaming of adventures and she's sharing it with her parents, and they're super supportive about it, which I love. One of the things that's kind of sad about Dee is she goes into the world trusting, loving, and like a lot of us growing up, Black girls, we are sort of forced to do a lot of it alone, and a lot more quickly than is expected of us.
Maybe it wasn't a good idea to bring Dee.
Ain't no getting around this. Every Negro's rite of passage in this country.
So Dee has to go through a lot of the things that she goes through alone. And at first, you can tell that she's just sort of used to it, but as it progresses, it hurts her. The idea of having to go through all these changes by herself hurts her until it physically changes her when she's cursed. A lot of things that she encounters that force her to grow up before her time. And one of them is the scene where she's leaving her best friend's funeral and she's really upset. And she encounters these adult men, these police officers who treat her like a thing. They don't treat her like a child or a girl worthy of protecting. They treat her as this throwaway object. And even though it's not an inherently sexual scene, there's a lot of very triggering behavior in it. Things that little Black girls go through that a lot of their peers don't really have to deal with. And she's doing it alone, and she doesn't tell anybody when it happens. We experience it when we see the physical manifestation of what they did to her when she starts to transform. At the end of the series, Dee has a choice to make, and it, to me, also represents the Black girl's journey, the reclaiming your space, the being able to grow, and just really not taking it anymore. She is the one who deals the death blow to Christina. She's the one that has to make the choice. The onus is on her to do it. And she's been transformed, not just emotionally, but she also has her kick-ass robot arm. She is a cyborg hero with her black Shoggoth. I would watch a million episodes about just her and her animal sidekick, like fighting crime and just being badasses. And so I feel like this is her reclaiming her girlhood. Yes, she had to make this very adult decision, but it was her decision. It wasn't something that was inflicted upon her. And she closes out the series. Like I was saying before about Tick is presumed to be the hero because he is the man and we follow what is intended for him. You would expect that he would live through the end of the show, but he dies. There's no out. And then the last person that we see before the show ends is this girl, this little girl who's just like, I'm not taking this anymore. A couple of clothing notes that I want to make about Dee. She also wears a baseball cap. She wears a baseball shirt in the last, it's like a sleeveless baseball shirt in the last episode. In the scene where she goes to Bobo's funeral, her dress is it looks like a Victorian mourning dress. It's high collar, it's got the lots of ruffles, but it's in white, and the white to me signifies purity. It's this, she goes to this thing being pure and sweet and wholesome and loving, and has to experience this awful thing that no one should have to experience, the murder of her best friend. And later when we see her, she's wearing her baseball cap, and just adding that little touch of the baseball cap with already a belted dress, she looks like a women's league baseball player. And I don't know if that was on purpose, because I know that the dress is probably likely inspired by the dress that the little girl in the Gordon Parks photo that was referenced in Sundown is wearing. But so it's this innocent thing, church dress kind of thing. But then just this addition of two little accessories makes her look like a baseball player. So later when we see her hold the baseball bat, like it looks purposeful and in place, like I'm here, I'm gonna do it. One last thing about Dee, and it's a very small thing. When she transforms back into herself, when the curse is lifted and her poor arm is dead, her pajamas have a celestial theme on them. And that leads very well into, God damn it, not again. Nothing seems weird, so I guess I just soldier on. Christina, the one that we know from the moment we meet her, has ulterior motives and then ends up being our villain, represents privilege, wealth, the duality of white privilege and gender differences. She's equal parts complex and two-dimensional. She insists herself on everybody's lives, regardless of what's best for them, because everything that she wants is more important than anything anyone else could possibly want. And because of this, she genuinely doesn't feel like the bad guy, almost like, but not quite to the extent of Magneto, because Magneto can still be seen as a sympathetic character. There's nothing sympathetic about Christina. She just wants what she wants. And the sympathy, the us feeling bad about it is that she's a woman, so she doesn't get to do as much stuff, but she still gets to do almost everything.
So that's why you brought me here. To help a father who clearly doesn't give two about you. After all, it's not all the daughters of Adam, is it?
Like Letty, she's very fashionable. She has really interesting types of like clothing that she goes to, things that look like they're almost out of time, things that look like they could be possibly a little bit in the future. But unlike Letty, who's doing it for just like attention, that kind of middle child syndrome type of thing, Christina does it so that she feels better than everyone else. She wants to look like she's the most important one in the room, and she wants to let you know that everything about her is better than you. When Christina is getting all of the blood from Tick, she's wearing a very virginal bride dress. It's pure white, and the second she slashes him open, she bathes in his blood. And throughout the series, she's worn a lot of just very bright red. It's usually when she appears on a scene, she's wearing a lot of this just blood red. And to me, that seems to point out the importance of blood, the fact that she wears so much red, being of noble blood, being of noble magical blood, and needing this blood from someone else. She also wears a lot of black and stark white. And when you find out later that she transforms into this character named William, who is a former lover of hers, she takes on his appearance. She wears almost muted colors, like the colors she was wearing, but more muted. So as William wears burgundy, gray instead of black, creams instead of whites. And when we eventually see that Ruby discovers that Christina is actually William, we see two outfits that are very similar: white button down with khaki pants for William, white button down with khaki skirt for Christina. And I thought that was very subtle and very clever.
You've been William this whole time?
It is interesting too that the one time we get Christina trying to emote empathy, she's wearing traditionally masculine clothing, and I think that she's doing that because the times she's blatantly trying to manipulate people is when she is William. As an aside, I hate how amazing she looks in this scene right here. And then, because I'm kind of doing this dual character breakdown of Christina and William, I think it's important to say that skin is then also costume in this show, like with Ruby wearing Hillary or Dell. She is wearing a costume. Same with Christina. Christina is wearing a William suit.
Oh, your skin is hanging off your bones.
She only wants to transform up. She's already great because she's a white woman with tons of money and magic. Why would she want to transform down to get what she wants? Transforming up is being William. William is a man, and he can move in different spaces than she can and get different respect than she can. She butters Ruby up with all kinds of fun and prizes, and then asks her for a favor, because it's more work but less embarrassment to be seen in that space as a black woman who is a servant. I think that's very telling about her character. Kind of going back to Ruby, when Ruby exacts revenge on her manager, she waits until the potion wears off so he can see her, so he knows that it wasn't someone who was almost his equal doing that to him. It was someone who was below him doing that to him. Also, I didn't like that scene, so I'm gonna move on. There's a line that Ruby says,
I don't know what is more difficult, being colored or being a woman. Most days I'm happy to be both, but the world keeps interrupting, and I am sick of being interrupted.
And to me, this speaks of Christina and her privilege. She's a woman, but in this world, she's white, and she's still considered better because of her whiteness. So even though she's a second-class citizen because she's a woman, she's still treated infinitely better than anybody of any gender, of any color, that's not white at the time. She makes this clear when she talks to Tick in the realtor's office.
And Tick, really, you have to be smarter than this. You know you can't just go around killing white women.
If she were to wear blackness, she would gain no privilege, so there's no point in her doing it. And just a last little thing about William. When he's just in the world, he's super fancy. He's got his braces, he's got his really expensive, beautiful shirts. There's one that he wears when he's at his valet, and the shoulder is gathered. It's kind of feminine. It's not like a regular men's dress shirt of the era. And I wonder if that's just a little Christina touch, but also he's almost never casual. And the one time we see him casual It's when he's going to insist himself upon Ruby at work, Hillary. And in his polo shirt, he's still wearing an ascot. So even though he's wearing comfy, cozy weekend driving clothes, he's still got his ascot. And I realized it's to hide his scar. It took me so many watchings to realize that. I was like, oh, he's wearing it with his polo. Who does that? Oh, yeah, no, someone trying to hide a magic scar. Yeah, that makes sense. Next, I'm going to talk about Jia. She is an interesting character because she represents what makes a monster. We think about monsters as storybook creatures or serial killers or abusive parents or bad bosses. There are these things that make you a monster, whether it's you're born a monster or you become a monster. And she is performing all of these different kinds of characters that make it hard to justify calling her a monster. And I mean, you could call her just, she's a mythical creature. She's the nine-tailed fox. But to her mother, she's a monster. She's just this thing that's being used to bring her daughter back after exacting revenge on her stepfather. So how do we get to the bottom of what does or does not make Jia a monster? First of all, she has to play human. As a human, she loves Judy Garland. And as somebody who loves art, I'm sure any one of you can't fake loving art, especially if you're alone. She's still being very true to herself. How do we say she's a monster when she can feel such joy? The theater also kind of represents what Jia is going through. The first time we see it, it's bustling outside and she's excited and she's in a great mood and everything's colorful. The second time we see it, they're evacuating and she's wearing her Western clothing. She's wearing her, her beautiful jacket. And then the last time we see it, it's boarded up and she's feeling a lot of despair. And I think that really represents kind of her state of mind throughout the episode. The mother is also performing mother. She does the bare minimum of performing mother, but once she remembers that Jia is a kumiho, she drops all pretenses and treats her like a monster. And I feel almost like that's more monstrous because Jia is really just trying to get her approval. And so whenever she's around the mother, she's only in traditional clothing. The mother is only in traditional clothing. There's one instance where she's dressed like a nurse and one instance where she's wearing a robe after she's killed a date. But for the most part, she is doing her very best to make her existence not a burden on the mother. And I think that's not monstrous. In fact, she's begging for love. She is enjoying the idea of having a mother, and she's doing all the things that you're supposed to do to make a mother happy. She's going to nursing school. She's bringing home the men to absorb. She's doing all the things she's supposed to do, and she's still not good enough. Next, we have her performing nurse. When she's nurse, she blends in. She's quiet, she observes, she doesn't really interact. The thing that sort of jars her out of it and makes her go back to human is a fellow nurse who genuinely wants to be her friend. One little scene that I thought was a cute attention to detail that showed that she can perform human and nurse at the same time is when her friend is leaving to go on her date and she invites her and she's like, no, I don't want to go. And before she leaves, the friend says, I like your socks. And it pans down to her socks and they're rolled down in a really interesting way, showing that she's got personality. I'm gonna say this one more time before I just let it go, but there's like just big gay energy, big bisexual energy when it comes to those two on screen, because like, I don't know if the friend has resting sexy voice, but everything she said seemed like there was something laced in there. I think they just would have been happy if they'd run off.
네 마음 바뀌면
우린 다방에 있을 거야. 제발 마음 좀 바꿔.
At the meeting, she is awkward. She's doing the things that she thinks she's supposed to do to get a boy to like her. None of the boys like her, even though she's the cutest one in the room. God damn it, I love Jamie Chung. She's so pretty. The one where she let down her guard and performed human still wasn't good enough. So she did the thing that was truest to herself and she still got rejected. We generally only see her perform human when she's by herself. The last character she plays is Lover. And this is what she does to entice men back to her house, to be able to absorb their essence. And she has to absorb, I think it's 100 souls. And then the mother can potentially get her daughter back. So she goes on dates, brings back all these men. And by the time we meet her, she's done this to like 96 or 97 men. And her mom always cleans up after her, but like makes her feel bad for doing the thing her mom wants her to do. When she's the lover, she's usually wearing darker colors. When she's performing human, she usually wears pastels and like more youthful, sweet colors. She looks like a bag of Jordan almonds when she's performing human. When she is performing Lover, the first time we see her do this, she's wearing this cocktail dress that looks like lingerie, and it's black, it's pink, it's very, very sexy. Even though it's beautiful and it fits her perfectly, she's detached. She knows she's doing a job. One thing that they do in this that, it's one of those things that kind of always bugs me is she's not wearing anything under this dress. And like women back then, they wore a lot of undergarments. And so I get that she's supposed to be like, I'm ready for sex, but like, she's not even wearing like a slip or a bra or like literally not a single undergarment under that dress. And it's not era appropriate. And it's one of those things that just bugged me, and personal preference, but like one undergarment. Haven't listened to the Lovecraft Country podcast, Lovecraft Country Radio yet, listen to it. It's so good. There's so much interesting insight. And they bring on guests. And the episode with Jamie Chung, her talking about merkins is one of my favorite things. The fact that she's like explaining merkins and just talking about how she really doesn't ever want her mom to see this show. It's wholesome. And it's one of the funniest things, and I just want to marry her. Is that so wrong? The first time she sees Tick is when he's dragging away her friend, the one friend she has. And then she sees him at the hospital, and he's injured. And her first reaction, because at that point she's performing nurse, so she's deadpan. Then we see rage. Eventually she softens to Tick and she goes back to her normal human colors when she sees him. She's wearing her little pastel cardigans over her nurse outfit. She's not just wearing the nurse outfit, she's performing human. But only like a little bit, because she hasn't completely let her guard down. She's still firmly convinced that she's going to take him as her last soul. But she's like, well, he's not that bad, I guess. He's also a victim in this. She's wearing her sweet blue jacket. I love this jacket that she's been wearing throughout the whole thing. And she comes into the room after she's introduced, like she gets in because all of his fellow soldiers think that she's a call girl. So it's the idea of her performing Lover, but that's not it at all. Like she's performing human and we know it because she's wearing her pastel. But it's so cute that Tick doesn't do anything disrespectful. He straightens her collar for her, which is just, he made her this theater and then he's like, let me fix this for you. And I'm just like,
I can fix that.
The children and I would enjoy a breeze now and then.
I can fix that.
This is so wholesome. This is beautiful and wholesome, and this is her getting to perform humanity in front of somebody. I love it. And her dress underneath, her jacket, is that Western Judy Garland look again. We see her kind of stepping back into that Judy Garland aesthetic, and I think that's her safe place. The only time we see her wearing traditional clothing outside of being with her mother or the elder is when she's trying to tell Tick about the fact that she's a kumiho, and she's kind of soft entering into it by telling him the tale of the kumiho. And she's wearing this pastel look. It's the same colors she's been wearing, but there's this hint of red, and I feel like because she's telling him her story, it's mostly human with the flash of monster. And I thought that was very clever. I hope it was on purpose, because that's how I read it. Like every time I've watched that episode, that's how I read it. In this same scene is when Tick tells her that he's allowed to go home. And so I then also wonder if that red flash representing her being the monster is just that welling up in her. Like, I want to be a normal daytime human person with this person, and now the one person that makes me feel human is leaving. So I guess I am a monster. In Hippolyta's episode, we see Gia in the US, and she's in all black, which to me signifies mourning. She really didn't wear black. I mean, if she wore black to be the lover, it was in conjunction with other colors, but she's wearing a lot of black and seems sad. We know she's there because her shoes are outside. Korean custom. Clever. Then we see Tick apologize to Gia, and she's wearing bright red. It is such a beautiful outfit. This cape, the hat, just everything about it is breathtaking. But also, it's head to toe red. She's the monster, but being the monster doesn't mean that she can't also be human. And she lets her guard down. Tick apologizes to her. Like a really good apology too. And after that, she's just in normal clothes. She doesn't really wear anything like super fancy after that. And we get to her choosing to be the hero. When we see Tick at the end and he's tied up, being drained of all his blood while Christina's doing her crazy chant in the blood and looking like a crazy person, we see Gia make the decision to be the hero. And she uses her monsterhood to save the day. And she does this wearing comfortable clothing, very similar to what Hippolyta wears after she kind of calms down and starts to be in adventure mode. When Letitia calms down and starts being in adventure mode, it's just comfortable clothes. And I think that's the most human we've seen her. So lastly, I just want to draw some attention to just some of the clothing of some other characters. Like, I really wanted to point out the things that Tick's ancestors are wearing. There's Hannah's look as she's running away pregnant. I did a lot of research to kind of figure out what slaves might have worn when they were pregnant around that time, and there's nothing. And there's not a ton even for like non-rich people who were pregnant at the time. So who knows? It could be correct. I don't know. I'm sure a historian would know, but I couldn't find anything. So I'll say it's fine. Hattie is who gives Letty the book of names, and she looks like she's in like Victorian mourning garb. It's really beautiful, just like a gothic fantasy. And just the embellishments on it are so gorgeous, and considering how small she is, they don't overwhelm her. And lastly, we've got Dora, who's Tick's mom, and I think she's got a similar essence to George in the way she dresses, these kind of summery, bright, buttery colors, and she looks very mom. And I'm sad that he didn't get to be around her anymore. One of the touches I thought was pretty cool was they brought in actual historical characters, so people who existed in real life. And I wanted to show you some of the ones that really caught my eye. We, of course, had Emmett Till, Bobo. They did such a good job of matching up what he was wearing in that famous photo down to his hat and his tie. It was flawless. Of course, Jackie Robinson. And I know it's not a historical figure, but they brought in Deja Thoris, which I'm sure made all of the geeks happy. I know it made my husband very happy. And then Gordon Parks, through the photos, I know I talked about this a little bit in the first episode, but I think they're very important and part of our cultural landscape. James Baldwin, not just in his spoken word, but also as a character in The Boarding House. I thought that was a really cute touch. Bessie Stringfield, badass lady motorcyclist. And if you haven't, look her up. Like, I don't want to spoil it for you. I know you can't spoil history, but she's really cool. Of course, we have Josephine Baker. She's an icon. And it was it was great to see them put forth the effort to find someone that looked so much like her. The costumes were just great. Of course, we have Frida Kahlo too. There were a lot of really good people in those scenes. Dinah Washington, who's a singer, she was in there, as well as Lena Horne, played by Shangela. How cool is that? This is fine, I guess. Okay, I'm gonna go forward. Let's talk about Hippolyta. And I'm gonna say right now, I'm sure there are times where I'm gonna say Hippolyta, because that's literally the only way I've ever heard it pronounced. So I'm sorry if I flub. I love this character. I'm trying my very best to say Hippolyta, and I'm super sorry. All right, so to me, Hippolyta represents the journey of the Black woman if she were to be given more of a choice. She's supposed to do a lot of things. She's supposed to be a wife, a mother. She's supposed to be supportive of everybody in her life. And she does everything she's supposed to do, but she doesn't get to do things she wants to do. And yes, she wants to be a mother and wants to be a wife, but she also wants more. She wants to be more of a part of making the guide. But George's wants of keeping her safe trumps her wants of going out on the road.
It's dangerous out there, Hippolyta. Where are you going?
She loves her daughter and encourages her to be an artist, and her daughter only sees her as a hero, which is so lovely. And I think they did a really good job of dressing her as the quintessential 50s mom. Like, everything she wears is very that. Like, when you think of a 50s mom, working class, she's wearing all of the right things. There's one thing about Hippolyta that I really liked, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of like my family dynamic, just the dynamic between my dad and me. I love that the one person that just really supports her and kind of her dreams and her being the most her is her dad, and everything that he does happens off camera. There's a point where she needs help, and she's brilliant. She's so close to unlocking this thing that with the orrery, and she calls him and asks him questions, and he doesn't correct her. He's just like, yeah, what can I do to help you?
That could explain why they're perpetually eclipsing each other. But, Daddy, what if they aren't eclipsing? What if they are really two sons?
Well, that sounds like the new comic you told me Diana's drawing, aka Out of This Universe.
At least having that voice on the end of the phone really helps her not give up on her dreams. That, coupled with Dee making comic book adventures of her mom as a hero, I think really keeps her grounded, gives her hope. For this section, I'm going to focus specifically on Hippolyta's episode, I Am, because there is a lot that happens, and a lot of it is fashion-based. In the beginning, she's in mourning. George is gone. She's sad. Like, she can't be fully on, but she's on enough to be the 50s mother. She's got her hair done, she's wearing clothes, but she's sad. She gets dressed up to go on her first guide trip, and she's trying to do the checklist with Dee, which is what she did with George anytime he would go on a guide trip.
Dee, you ready to go over the checklist?
It's all there. Then we go through this stupid checklist.
Tick shows up trying to borrow the car, and she's like,
It's important.
So is my trip.
and in any other hero's journey, he would have gotten what he wanted because he's their big, strong, special boy. But she's like, my trip is also important, putting my foot down. A little note on what Hippolyta is wearing in this scene. I really like it because it kind of looks like time-lapse light photography. And that's pretty cool and kind of like weirdly futuristic in a way. She does, though, realize that Dee loves and supports her because even though she didn't do the full checklist, she left an Erythia Blue comic book in her picnic basket, which was so sweet, and it was just a nice surprise. And I feel like that's that kind of cute, perfect mom dynamic, but in reverse. Like, instead of getting the lunch note, the like, I love you, do good in school, it was, I love you, Mom, have fun on your adventure. It was just really sweet. She loves her mom even though she has the sad mads. When we see her trying to figure out how to work this contraption, she's smarter than all of these buttholes, and she has to feign ignorance to not get killed. She sees the rip in reality, and then everything. She's drawn into it. When she wakes up in this place, she's nude and confused. Yes, we see boobies, but they aren't sexualized. And I love in this show that there is quite a bit of nudity, but only the sexy nudity is sexualized. When it's just meant to be there, it's just there because it makes sense. She's been changed. She's got these wrist doodlies, and what are they? We don't know. She doesn't know. She just knows she's got weird stuff in her wrists, but at least she's got a jumpsuit to put on. We meet a character with the best name, Beyonce. I'm going to put it right here so you can see the very clever spelling of it, because I love this character's name. This character looks like Garnet from Steven Universe, so I love that too. So in this room, she tries to level herself and regain control. She alters her uniform. She takes the sleeves off, wraps them around her wrist doodlies, and figures out a way out. But Beyonce puts her back in and is like, you are not in a prison. Eh? What does that mean? So she then is told to name herself.
Name yourself. Name yourself.
What the are you talking about?
Where do you want to be? Name it. Who do you want to be? Name it. Name it.
I want to be dancing on stage in Paris with Josephine Baker.
I love the scene where she goes to be a fangirl in the past, and it's the first time we really see her let go. Like, she's thrust onto the stage wearing something she would never wear. Think of the gossip. That's not what proper 50s mothers wear. But she just goes with it because she's like, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe they let me in. This is amazing. That's her. Holy cow. And so she gets to dance and she's doing a bad job and everyone's scolding her. And she's like, I'm just excited to be here. I'm excited to be included. And as she gets to know Josephine and just all of these other artists, she lets her guard down. And like, we see this kind of emerging bisexuality. And I love that so many shows are now not afraid to kind of explore queerness in Black media. And we saw the same thing happen in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Just out there. Nobody cares. Like, yes, people care, but when you're with your people, you feel safe. Just do it. Who cares? Then she names herself again. I am Hippolyta. She's a warrior. She names herself herself. This is one of the few scenes that bugs me. The costumes look a little DIY to me. They look like kind of modern and curated, but it's supposed to be in the past, but there's these things that look like they're man-made, and I know I should just suspend my disbelief because it's fantasy and like, why would they be with the Confederacy all of a sudden? But I thought the costumes could have been so much more. I wish they had been, but it is what it is. There's a point where we see that Hippolyta is wearing red modern underpants. Like, that's just bad attention to detail. Then she names herself George's wife. And we're back to the first time we see her. She's in her nightie. He's snuggling up with her. Everything is comfy cozy and just normal. It's a very normal scene. He's loving up on her like he did in that first time we see it. But she decides to tell him how she feels. She's honest with him, like fully bare honest with him. He's always been supportive, but she was afraid that he wouldn't listen to her or trust her bravery, her intelligence. And part of that is conditioning, being taught what you have to say doesn't matter because you're just a wife, you're just a mother. But he was never given the chance to believe her, and given the chance, he does. So without hesitation, they go on an adventure together. And this is when we see just pure sweet cinnamon rolls being in love in space with aliens and this great astro-punk retro-futurist costumes. The spacesuits are perfect. She gets to be Erythea Blue. It's just the purest, sweetest scene, but it's also her continuing to just drop her guards. What I love about the fact that she is seeing herself as Dee's artwork is that even though she was finally able to name herself all these things,
That Hippolyta, she was so small. But Dee, she needs me.
she names herself Dee's mother. Her daughter is keeping her centered. And it's not that she has to give up her life to be a mother. It's that she is choosing her wants and needs and now has the choice to be mother. And I think that's beautiful. And a choice, to be honest, a lot of women, especially Black women in the 50s, just didn't get. It's really great to see her on her magic. This better be the last choice. Okay, that's seriously. Okay, this is fine. Hippolyta has named herself. She's in space. She's floating around in an even grander version of what she was wearing with George. And she feels free, and she's spinning, and Beyonce is wearing this celestial gown that's taking up everything. It's so beautiful. And it sort of reminds me of Fantasia a little bit when Nox takes over. At this point, she just wants to go home. She wants to go to Dee. And I love that she gets to have a choice. When she comes back through the tear in reality, she comes back just in time to save her people, and she's become Erythea Blue, which is such a cool, magical journey that a lot of Black women don't generally get to have in science fiction. It's really empowering to see, and I loved it so much. She uses what she has knowledge of now to set her daughter at ease, which was teaching herself how to draw so she could make a comic for Dee of the two of them together. And a cool little tidbit that I love is they actually name the comic artist. Her name is Afua. She's a real artist. And the fact that the show gave her this shout out saying, I learned from this brilliant artist named Afua. I love that they tied up the time travel aspect a little bit, showing that she could go to the future to learn how to do this thing to then bring back to her daughter. One of the great things about the cover of this comic was the original has Dee's robot arm, but they didn't want to spoil it, so they had her make an alternate cover where Dee's arm is normal. We've got Hippolyta wearing her comfy, cozy clothing, similar stuff to what Letty's wearing, similar stuff to what Gia wears later. And she's wearing this baseball cap that we've seen a couple times throughout the show. And it shows that she's comfortable and settled in, and she's part of the group, she's included. All in all, Hippolyta is a character I could not have hoped to have seen even 5 years ago. Like, we're seeing so many more options for like women who are mom-aged, women who are not thin, women who are seen as mothers, and that's positive because they're not just mothers. And the fact that she got to go on this grand adventure, and it's one of the best adventures of the entire series, that's thoughtful storytelling. And I'm glad that we got to have it. Thank you for joining me for the second episode of my breakdown of Lovecraft Country. This one might be a little bit longer just because I had those two thorough breakdowns of Gia and Hippolyta, but I thought it wouldn't really do it justice if I didn't talk about kind of every single look they had in their most important solitary episodes. And I can't wait to see more media like this, the really thoughtful costuming that tells the story of the character, as well as interesting and thought-provoking science fiction, horror, fantasy, all of these things that we're seeing so much more of. If you like this episode, please hit the like. If you feel like subscribing, I would really appreciate it. And I guess I want to ask you guys a couple of things. What do you consider a monster? Do you make a monster, or are you born a monster? If you could name yourself, what would it be? So until next time, I'm Samantha Ray. This has been Cinematire, and I wish all of you safe adventures. They were so gay. They were so gay. Like, just hold on. I hold my friends' hands all the time. Yeah. Never like, it's never like that. No, get out of here.